Hi, I'm Katie Craig, the director of the Betcher Foundation Scholarship Program, and I'm here today to talk with you about tips and tricks on how to ace your college and scholarship applications. Before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit about my background, which is that I was myself a Betcher Scholar from Douglas County High School in Castle Rock, Colorado. I used my Betcher Scholarship at the University of Denver, where I triple majored in French, creative writing, and communications. After graduation, I worked and traveled in Europe for about a year before returning to the University of Denver, where I was the assistant director of their university honors program for 5 years. At that point, my husband and I went to Central America to do 9 months of service work, and when I returned from that trip, I started my work here at the foundation. I'm excited to talk with you about the college application process because it was something that I found to be pretty overwhelming, and I'm hoping that this presentation will make it much more manageable for you. I'd also like to draw your attention to the fact that there is a PDF of a handout packet that has a lot of information that's contained in this presentation in that packet. That's something that you can look at for the websites that have to do with financial aid, finding scholarships, all sorts of great things so that you don't have to be furiously scribbling down notes while I'm talking with you. All right, well, without further ado, let's get started. The first thing I want to ask you is what you ask yourselves when you're about to make a large purchase. Now, if you're anything like me, one of the first things that you might like to know is how much is it going to cost you exactly? Well, this isn't exact, but given that I don't know where you're looking at going to college, I've provided some averages of estimates for you for costs at a public in-state, public out-of-state, and private institution. So you'll see the 3 columns there. It's important to know that those are different types of costs, and you're going to be looking in different ranges if you consider different types of institutions. Another thing that's good to look at are all of the rows. So don't just look at the tuition and fees number because you're also going to need to pay for books and living expenses. Those living expenses are also tricky because they include not just room and board, but also things such as health insurance and gas money if you're going to be commuting to campus or to a job off campus. You'll see that we've totaled each of those numbers at the end of each column in big bold letters. The trick about that is that that's just for 1 year. So you're going to need to multiply those already large numbers probably by at least 4 years to find your total cost of college. Not to be too depressing. So, seriously a sobering thought. Next question then is, how are you going to pay for that? And that's what I'm hoping I can help with. I recognize that it's a huge expense. It's something that my parents and I certainly couldn't have done on our own, so we turned to financial aid. Now, financial aid is important because the federal government has a philosophy that it's your family's, but primarily your responsibility to pay for higher education because the federal government paid for K through 12 education. Now, how are you going to do that when that's primarily your responsibility? The answer lies in financial aid. The 2 types of financial aid are gift aid, which is money given to you that you do not need to pay back, or self-help aid. Now, of course, the free money sounds like the better option, so that's where I'm going to focus most of my time today. But a quick note on self-help aid before I move on. The first is that work study is a great opportunity. It's convenient because the programs or departments on campus that are offering work study positions are right next to your classes. You're already there. At the same time, they understand the demands of a student schedule, so it's possible that they could be pretty lenient during midterms and finals. They might also increase your hours during spring break if you happen to have more free time. The other thing is that you can learn applicable skills and perhaps start a future career. Also a note about loans. I know it can seem daunting to take on a large amount of debt, but please remember that the majority of students, the vast majority, are taking out loans. It's going to be some part of their financial aid package, and future lenders down the line, later in your life, will almost expect to see those loans. At the same time, I know that it's relative, but the interest rates for student loans are much more generous than they are for other loans. So don't let that throw you or deter you from trying to go to college. Now, back to that gift aid that I mentioned, the free money people give you that you don't have to give back. There's one of those that you can control, which is scholarships. Those are the ones that you can go out and you can earn. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Of course, before you can actually receive scholarships, you need to find them, which can be tricky sometimes. So how do you locate scholarships, and specifically those scholarships that you are particularly eligible for? Well, my biggest piece of advice is to go straight to the high school guidance counseling office. These people are pros. This is what your counselor does every day, year in, year out. So go ahead and introduce yourself to him or her. If you haven't already been by the counseling office, stop in. Let your counselor know that you're interested in college and that you're interested in scholarships. It's never too early to have that conversation. At the same time, when it does get to be about spring of your junior year, fall of your senior year, your counselors might actually have applications in hand that they could pass right to you and have you go and begin to hand out. The other thing that you can do is look on websites and other places, and your counselors will have their finger on the pulse of where to find some of these scholarships. They'll also be very familiar with the deadlines, so stop in early and often. The other place that's a great place to start is universities or colleges. Wherever you think that you might be applying, a key question to ask is there a separate application for scholarships than there is from admissions? Now, some people will be immediately considered for institutional aid as they're being considered for admissions. Other times, there is going to be a separate scholarship application, and that's something that's good to know about. So make sure that you're asking that question and that you're not just stopping with the admissions office and the institutional aid, because sometimes there are going to be different scholarships for programs and departments. Perhaps there's one for a student who wants to major in French, or who's going to be a junior working at the literary journal in the English department. Those are good questions to ask if you think you know what degree program you're going to be following. Now, another area to go to would be religious, ethnic, and civic organizations, something like the Rotary Club or the Lions Club, and keep in mind veterans organizations like the VFW. Those are places to go that are close by in your hometown, and they're oftentimes offering scholarships. Now, I have heard from some students that they feel it's fruitless sometimes to spend the amount of effort that it takes to write essays and fill out applications for what can sometimes be small scholarships from these local groups. But I just really want to reiterate that every bit counts. Everything adds up to a really substantial amount. The other thing is that you can mix and match pieces of your applications in order to maximize the impact that you get for the energy that you're investing. So don't overlook some of our smaller scholarships. Also keep in mind businesses and labor unions, both very well-known businesses like Coca-Cola or Motorola, but also think about where your parents are employed. Oftentimes businesses will have scholarship programs for the dependents of their employees. So it's always worth asking. Finally, there are private foundations. That's what the Better Foundation is. Also what the Daniels Fund is, if you're familiar with Daniels. A number of us are out there, and many of us, myself included, have as our sole purpose in our job to identify great candidates and award scholarships. So seek us out and apply for our scholarships. A couple other places to go. Certainly the internet is a great resource. We've listed 3 sites here, and again, these sites are also in the handout packet that you can download or print from the website. These are ones that we've listed because they do not ask for a fee. I would really caution you to not go any place where they're going to ask you to pay money in order to earn money. Those tend to be scholarship scams, and the scholarships that you receive through those types of searches are sometimes scholarships you're not even eligible to apply for. So these are 3 great ones. There are some other great ones out there. Just don't ever pay any money to earn that money at the end. Also, good resources and books. I know it seems kind of old school, but they're still a great place to go for great information. One great book is the Colorado Collegiate Handbook, which is published by the Colorado Council on High School College Relations. That's an organization in Colorado that is specifically dedicated to the transitions profession. That's managing the transition between high school and college. Every high school guidance counseling office should have a copy of this handbook, so go and check one out as soon as you can. It's a great place to get started. Of course, bookstores and libraries are also a great place to go. The one caveat that I would mention when using books for scholarship searches is that you're going to want to follow up with the organizations either through the internet or by phone or email in order to check the current year's deadlines, because deadlines will change from year to year, and the last thing that you want to do is invest all of the time in an application only to find out that you're one day late. Now, I think that we would agree that scholarships are an excellent way to pay for college. It's that free money that I talked about, but the catch is that they have to be earned. So once you've found them, you still need to earn them, which leads us to our next question, which is, how do you do that exactly? Well, the first thing that you need to do is have a well-rounded high school experience. The Better Foundation, we've come up with an acronym to help you remember the different components of that well-rounded experience. And that acronym is ACE, which stands for Academics, Community Service, and Extracurricular Activities. Now, what do I mean when I talk about these things? Well, first of all, academics. Now, that's not just the GPA, although that is important. But we also want to see a strong academic record. So an A in calculus could actually be the pinnacle that you're aiming for, but a B in calculus might be more compelling than an A in geometry. What that's showing us is that you're challenging yourself, you're trying to stretch, and you're trying to maximize your opportunities within the context of your high school. So consider that and think about how you can really encourage yourself to grow academically. The other thing is to take a college prep curriculum. Remember that we as scholarship providers are investors, and we're looking for sound investments just like anyone else. We have finite resources and a limited number of scholarships to provide. So if we're trying to decide between two otherwise equal candidates, but we see that one of them has taken a very strong college prep curriculum, what that's going to tell us is that that student is a safe bet. That student is not only going to be enrolled at a college campus, but once he or she sets foot on campus, he or she is going to thrive. And that's what we're looking for, someone who will persist and then graduate from college. Another way of indicating that to us is by taking 4 years of your core subjects, even if that's not required at the high school level. Finally, those standardized tests are important. My advice to you on those are to practice, to plan ahead, and if possible, to take it twice. Statistics have shown if you take it a second time, you're very likely to improve your score. Now, the good news is that you don't have to take it 15 times because those same statistics have also shown that once you've taken it the second time, you've pretty much honed in on your ability score. So keep that in mind. Make sure to practice, get a good night's rest. Now let's move on to community service. When we're looking at community service, we're looking at the depth of participation, the length of commitment, and the leadership and initiative. Well, what does that mean? Well, think for a minute about some of the different types of community service that you've done. Have you perhaps volunteered at a soup kitchen or worked with Habitat for Humanity? Maybe you've planted trees or mentored younger students. Well, what did that depth of participation look like? Did you show up and then follow instructions as the member of a crew, which is very valuable work? But maybe you also then realized that the crew was pretty small, and you went out and you recruited people from your school to join it, and you made that crew a little bit more robust so that you could have that much more of an impact. Well, that's a little bit more depth of participation. If you were a volunteer recruiter or a coordinator, if you were a crew chief, for example, those are different levels of participation, in addition to the fact that you were still doing the work. Another good example of that is a scholar that we had a few years ago who was very interested in the Red Cross. She ended up being involved on a number of different levels, where she was a volunteer working different fairs and information booths. She was also on the Youth Advisory Board, and then because of her great work there, she was one of the first students ever asked to be on the Adult Advisory Board. So she had a number of different connections to the Red Cross. Length of commitment is something else that we look at. So if you volunteered in a soup kitchen, was that just one Saturday morning? Or was it a couple hours every Saturday morning for your entire junior year? Maybe for multiple years. That's going to tell us about the length of your commitment to that organization. Finally, leadership and initiative. So the example I used earlier of recruiting additional volunteers for the crew chief, that's something where you're taking initiative. You're identifying a problem and you're proposing a solution. That could be an official leadership position with a title, but it may not be. So remember, when you're being specific and detailed, which is something I'm going to talk about in a minute, that you're quantifying and qualifying your unofficial leadership as well as your official leadership positions. Now, everything that I've just said for community service is also applicable for our extracurricular activities. We're looking at the depth of participation, the length of commitment, and again, the leadership and initiative. The other thing that I'll highlight when talking about extracurricular activities is that this is a large umbrella category. It encompasses many things. So certainly anything that's outside of your curriculum, so extracurricular, would be the very most obvious things that I'm sure you think of first, like athletics, clubs, arts organizations, theater, those sorts of things. But it's also your hobbies and your work. Many students come to us and they say, I don't have time to do any extracurricular activities. I work 40 hours a week. Well, that in itself is extracurricular. So if you happen to work at King Soopers, for example, and you were promoted from a cashier to a shift supervisor, well, let us know that, because that's going to speak to your leadership and initiative as well as the faith that your employer has in you. So make sure that you're telling us everything that you're doing. A good way to remember this and to not leave things out is to look through your daily or your weekly schedule. Ask yourself, what is it you're doing before and after school on a typical Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? That way you'll make sure to capture all of the great things that you do just because you do them, and you won't forget to write them down. Also a good reminder is that it's not the number of activities that a student is involved in, but the quality of his or her contributions that matter. A good analogy to help you remember this one is that we're not looking for the busy bee that flits from activity to activity, maybe spends 10 minutes in the back of a committee meeting here and there once a week. What we're looking for is the student who really makes a contribution, the spider, if you will, who is drawing connections and really creating a web of meaning. So ask yourself where you're making your biggest contributions. And if you're an underclassman, where you can make more. Again, the acronym to help you remember that well-rounded experience is ACE for academics, community service, and extracurricular activities. Now, once you've had these experiences, you've done the good work, you've made your contributions, the next question, of course, is how do you translate that onto paper or into an online application, and how do you do that in such a way that your applications will stand out from all of the others that are coming to selection committees across the nation? Well, I'll answer your question with a question, which is, what do you see in this picture? Is it a rabbit? Maybe a duck? Well, if you just see one, hopefully if you look closer, you'll now see the other. So one could be the rabbit with its ears pointing straight back from its head, or if you shift your perspective a little bit, those ears become the beak of a duck. How about this one? Now some of you will quickly see the profile of a man with his nose, mustache, beard, and his hand on his jacket. Others of you will have first seen a woman and man standing in an archway with a dog sleeping nearby. Last one, how many faces do you see in this picture? 1, looking straight forward, 2 in profile, facing each other, or 3? The correct answer would be 3, after you've taken a little while to try on a couple of different perspectives. Now, my point in showing you these is that this idea of shifting your perspective is directly applicable to your college and scholarship application process. You know your activities, you know your life, your contributions, and all of the things that you do, but the person who's on the receiving end of your application doesn't know them as intimately. So it's very important that you are as specific and detailed as possible so that when we receive your application, we know exactly what it is that you've been doing. So it's very good, and I know that this is tough, especially in senior year, but it's really great exercise if you can give yourself enough time after having filled in your application that you can put it away for a while and then come back to it and read it as a reader. That way you're shifting your perspective to be the person who's receiving the application and see if it makes sense to you and you can quantify your contributions. I'll give you a couple examples of this. In terms of how you present yourself on paper or online in order to give yourself credit for all of the great things that you've done. Now, the content, the meat of your application, obviously counts. The way that you can really hone in on that is to make sure that you're focusing on the selection criteria. So you're remembering academics, community service, and extracurricular activities, but you're also using the selection criteria that we as scholarship providers have given you in order to tailor your answers. We're not going to be secretive about it. It's going to be right on the very first page of the application or the first screen of the online application where we say what it is we're looking for in selecting our scholars. You can then target all of your answers, whether they be short answer questions, essays, or even just the description of how you go through your activities and the contributions that you've made. You can target them to those selection criteria. Keep those in mind, and as I said before, be specific and detailed. Now here's an example of that. Food bank volunteer. Certainly a valuable service activity, but how does it rate in terms of being specific and detailed? Thumbs up or a thumbs down? Well, personally I'd give it a thumbs down because I have no idea what this person did. But if they tell me that they volunteered 20 hours per week during junior year to collect canned food and to coordinate the food basket distribution with the local food bank, that's much more helpful to me. All of a sudden they have quantified their contribution. So I know that it was 20 hours per week, basically a part-time job. It was through the entire junior year, so that's that length of participation we talked about. They didn't just collect the canned food, but they also coordinated, which is a leadership position, the food basket distribution. Those are 2 points of entry, which is the depth of participation, collecting and distributing. Finally, that's with the local food bank, which tells me that they've gone beyond the school, and that's at a higher level there in terms of being a local level. Another example, student council. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Well, my guess is that you're with me now, hopefully on the same page, that that's not as helpful as something that's more specific and detailed, such as this. Served as vice president of student council, represented my school at a statewide conference, and served as chair of the prom committee. Now that tells me exactly what that student did. Again, the vice president is very helpful, but it doesn't have to be an official leadership role. It's possible that you were on the soccer team and tried out as a senior for the varsity team, but were cut, decided to stay on the JV team and lead the practices. So you were an unofficial practice leader. Well, give yourself credit for that and let me know that that's what you've been doing to spend your time. Now, essays and short answers. We get a lot of questions about these, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on them. The first one sounds very obvious, but it's not. Please answer the question. Oftentimes people get so excited or potentially stressed out about what it is that they need to write the college essay on that they won't tie it back to the question. That's particularly true if you have a two-part question. For example, talk about someone who has positively influenced you and how. Someone might start talking about that person, let's say Abraham Lincoln. We're going to learn a lot about Abraham Lincoln, but we're not going to come back to why Abraham Lincoln is meaningful to that student. And that's where the real meat of the essay is, because we want to see what's important to you. That brings us back into some of these other bullets here. So you're remembering the selection criteria, which is all geared toward you. We're looking for, at the Boettcher Foundation, for example, the outstanding academic ability that I mentioned, but also leadership, service, and character. So what is it about academics, leadership, service, or character that really make you look up to Abraham Lincoln? Gear your essay toward those selection criteria. Hopefully not in a heavy-handed way, but certainly in a way that shows that you know which scholarship you're applying for. Also be personal and descriptive. As I mentioned, the purpose of the essay is to highlight you and what you value. So again, provide insight into who you are, what you value. Be organized and concise. This is another opportunity for you to put your best foot forward and show us your best academic work. As a result, you need to focus on your tone and your overall impression. A key point in that is if you're using humor or sarcasm, make sure that it's coming across in the right way. So you might want to have a good friend and then also a parent or a teacher read your essay and ask them, first of all, if it sounds like you. That'll address your tone. And then also how it landed with them. Were your jokes funny, or did they have an edge to them that you really don't want a selection committee to see? Finally, please proofread. I used to teach grammar, and I understand that it's not the most exciting of topics, but it's important because if your grammar is so distracting, then we'll never hear what it is that you're trying to tell us. Certainly your message is most important, but proofreading for spelling, punctuation, and mechanics will help us see what your message is. Also, in terms of content, you may need to ask for recommendations, so a couple tips on that. First, provide your recommenders with a resume so that they can address a number of different things in filling out your application. It's also very helpful if you allow enough time before the deadline. I would suggest a month if at all possible, at the very minimum 2 weeks. Then highlight the requirements of the scholarship or the profile of the institution. So remember those selection criteria and highlight them for your recommender. And then follow up and thank people after they've written your recommendation letter. Remember that that takes a considerable amount of time. It's essentially the equivalent of your writing the college essay. So make sure to thank them. And make sure also to tell them how you've done in the selection process. After they've invested that time, they're going to be very interested to know how you've done. The presentation also counts. So a couple tips on that. Do present a professional product. Again, just like this is an example of your academic work, it's also an indication of your professionalism. So make sure that the product at the end is professional. Abide by the length and format requirements. That shows us you can follow instructions. Edit your work and proofread. I know I've said that twice now, but I can't emphasize it enough. Then also follow the directions. So what type of deadline is it? Is it an online or submitted deadline, or is it a postmarked by deadline? If it is still hard copy, is it a received by deadline? Make sure that any special requirements are followed. Word count, font size, additional information either requested or discouraged. Follow those instructions. Then also, again, pay attention to the selection criteria, but also the eligibility requirements, and then any tips and hints that are found in the application. Reading instructions carefully will be one of your best secret decoder ring keys to trying to fill out a competitive application. Finally, make or print copies of everything. In our process, for example, we have our interviews in March after the application deadline of November 1st. So a number of months have passed between the time when a student has filled out our application and when he or she walks in our door to be interviewed. And all of our interview questions are based on the application. So it's very helpful for a student to have copies of the application to review prior to the interview. There's also always the likelihood that something will get lost in the mail or won't submit online correctly. So having those hard copies or PDFs on your desktop will really be useful. So remember, the content counts. That's the meat of the application, and you're going to be specific and detailed when you're quantifying that. But then also the presentation counts. You're going to be proofreading. You're going to be looking over everything to make sure it's a very professional product. And your job in doing so is to convince your readers that they want to meet you in person, either because they've invited you to join them on their college campuses or because they've invited you to come in for an interview. So very quickly, a few interview tips if you happen to be in processes that involve interviews. The first one is to be yourself. Just like the college essay, we are looking in an interview to find who the person is behind the paper. So make sure to show us that person, that personality that has led to all of the success that you've had. Do keep the selection criteria in mind. Again, it's helpful to review your application. Be prepared to discuss your goals for college and beyond, because again, we're investors investing in your potential and in your college career. Employ good communication skills. So you might want to practice not playing with your hair, not saying too often. Those types of tics and tricks will be a good thing to be paying attention to. Do your homework on the organization. It would be nice, for example, if you interviewed for the Boettcher Scholarship, if you knew a little bit about the Boettcher family. All of that information is on our website, and if you've done your homework, that will really be to your best advantage. Also, it's a good idea to have a mock interview. Oftentimes your counseling department or teachers will be willing to ask you a number of questions that might appear in an interview situation. That will give you a chance to employ those good communication skills and to see how well you're answering questions with an eye toward those selection criteria. Finally, dress appropriately. Now, I know that means different things to different people in different situations, but a good rule of thumb would be to wear something that you would wear to receive an award that you are very proud of. So keep that in mind. In coming to an interview, it's a way of showing the selection committee that you value this opportunity. All right. Now that's what I wanted to share with you about college and scholarship applications in general. Now I'm going to take just a couple minutes to tell you about the Boettcher Scholarship specifically. We were founded in 1952 as a scholarship program. Now the Boettcher Foundation itself was founded in 1937, but in 1952, our donors, the Boettcher family, decided that they wanted to retain Colorado's best and brightest students in the state of Colorado. Now the hope was that would encourage and enable them to receive their higher education in the state of Colorado and to continue their leadership and service in a way that they would develop contacts and hopefully begin their professions in the state. Now that is through a 4-year full-ride scholarship to any public or private institution in the state. Now that would cover tuition and fees. That also covers the book stipend, as I mentioned. We have a living stipend as well. And then we also have some scholar grants. So an international education grant you see is $5,500 for a semester abroad or $8,600 for a year abroad. Also 4 types of educational enrichment grants, which are opportunities for students to have specially designed projects or programs, and they can apply for up to $3,000 from us to fund those projects or programs. So overall, the total package ends up being between $50,000 and $160,000 per student. Now, some key components you heard me mention before: eligibility requirements. Who is eligible to apply for our scholarship? Well, the minimum eligibility requirements are that students must be in the top 5% of their graduating class. They need to have a minimum test score of 27 on the ACT or 1200 on the critical reading and math sections of the SAT. Need to be a Colorado resident for their junior and senior year, and also a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Now, our selection criteria, you heard me mention before, but I'll reiterate them again here. So an excellent academic record, leadership and involvement, service to school and community, and outstanding character. That's all that I have for you today. If you have any questions that remain, please feel free to look at the other resources on this website or always contact us at the Foundation. Best of luck in all you do.